I'm John Gormley. Welcome. I didn't tweet, did I? On now at Premier Brad Wall. Okay, there we go. Just hit tweet. So the people in the Twitter sphere know Premier Wall is here for our monthly session of Ask the Premier. Now, boy, you look at the rundown of things to talk about. There are many. The Premier and I will go back and forth on a number of issues. But of course, this is also a great public accountability session that the Premier all those years ago in 2007, agreed to submit himself to once a month or so. He takes your calls on anything you want to ask the Premier about today. 1-877-332-8255. And let's check in now in Swift Current with Premier Brad Wall. Premier, thanks for taking our call.
Thank you, John. Good morning.
Let me begin on the top story of the day. Of course, the Alberta election, which is looking historic in many measures. The new Wild Rose Party challenging the 41-year Progressive Conservative dynasty. What are your impressions of what you've seen?
Well, first of all, just as a sort of a political junkie, it's going to be a very, very interesting evening, and I'm going to be paying close attention to it. When Alberta changes their government, it takes a while, but they change the government, and it does look, if the pollsters are right, it looks like we're heading to that change now. I think it's important from a Saskatchewan perspective, and I've heard some of the coverage on News Talk about some of the issues around our respective economies and labor shortages, that sort of thing going forward. Whoever the government of Alberta is, we've got something that's very positive happening called the New West Partnership, where Western Canada, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC work together to make sure we don't have unnecessary barriers to trade and growth between our jurisdictions, but also that we would cooperate even in trade missions. And we did that in China and Japan a couple of years ago and want to continue to do that, where we open up trade offices together instead of separately, and we're marketing under the banner of Canadian Natural Resources in the New West. And so whatever the result of tonight, we're hopeful that the New West Partnership will remain strong.
Do you have a Premier, Redford or Smith, who you would prefer to work with?
No.
Okay. I expected that. I didn't quite expect you to be that direct. So you'll work with either of them?
Oh, absolutely. We'll work with, on the other side of us, we have Manitoba that's chosen not to be in the New West Partnership, and we have joint cabinet meetings with them as well. We're working to harmonize highways regulations to make it easier on the transport industry between our jurisdictions. I think it's incumbent on any government, regardless of its stripe, to be working with its neighbors where it makes sense to deliver services together, or perhaps to reduce some of these unnecessary barriers that spring up between provinces, sometimes worse between provinces than going down in the U.S.
Good point. Premier Brad Wallace here. Let me bring you back to the last time you were here was just post-budget. The provincial budget, I want to find out what the reaction's been like. For the first time, you had $60 million in savings you had to find, about $34 million in reductions or cutbacks, another $27 million in new fees and new charges. What has the reaction been like to those changes in the budget?
Well, whenever you make those changes, those difficult decisions, people who are impacted by them are going to be concerned, and they're going to express that concern, and we've seen that happen on a number of different issues. I think the two most prevalent being the changes to the seniors drug plan and the film tax credit decision, or the tax grant decision that we made. On the other hand, I think there's been a lot of support for the fact that we are the only province in the country, including the feds now, that have a balanced budget. I think I don't think that's ever happened actually in the history of the country before, where there's only one. And certainly I'm not sure it's ever happened where we were the only one. And I think that fiscal responsibility is the cornerstone of the foundation of what we're calling the Saskatchewan Advantage, and our chance to build on that into the future. We were also able to keep all the promises we made in the campaign in this first budget after the election. So, it's been on balance, I think it's been well received, but there are concerns.
Okay, so those concerns, when they're expressed, you extended the wind-up period on the employment film tax credit in order, if pictures were going to qualify, they'd have a longer window in which to qualify. Some in the industry are starting a petition. They're trying to get you to do either to save it or rehabilitate it or do something else. What's the status on that?
Well, the film tax credit as it existed, which is a grant, and I'll explain that in a moment. It really is a grant. It walks like a grant. It talks like a grant. Is not going to be reinstated. It's about 335 direct jobs created in the industry, last year, and that's roughly the number in the last while as the industry's really gone down, unfortunately, here and elsewhere. And so if you do the math in terms of all the money that taxpayers put into it, this tax grant, the subsidy to the soundstage, other funding through Sask Film, you come to a number of, it can be between $15,000 and $18,000 per job subsidy. And we've just made the decision that that kind of a grant isn't the best economic policy. That sort of choosing winners and losers in that directive form, it just doesn't make sense. What we've said, though, is we're prepared to look at an actual tax credit. We've moved to a truer tax credit, in other words, credit that's earned off of taxes paid in the province, rather than just a grant whether you make any money and pay any taxes here or not. That we want to move to that kind of a true tax credit. We'd be willing to do that in the case of the film industry, and there's been a bit of dialogue already, and I think there'll be more in the future.
Premier Brad Wall with us. This is our monthly session of Ask the Premier. The other story that has been emerging, and we're going to have some talk a little bit later this morning at 11 o'clock on this, you allowed historically the private industry into selling wines and liquors. Willow Park in Regina, Cava Secreta in Saskatoon. Cava and SLGA, the regulator, are at odds. SLGA says Cava will have its license revoked. It has broken the law, they suggest, and on they go. This has started a pretty vigorous debate about SLGA, which, as I understand it, is the regulator, the licensing body, the tax collector, the distributor, the wholesaler, and by far the largest retailer of liquor. So it wears all of these hats. So as you liberated the market by allowing these two, did you make it too restrictive in not fundamentally changing those 7 roles that SLGA plays?
John, there are rules that have existed for some time because, as you know, we actually have a very rich blend of private and public retail sales in the liquor distribution business in the province. We have a large number of private outlets for alcohol sale, whether it's an off sale or the many, many special vendors that exists in all manner of other kinds of stores in rural Saskatchewan. And whenever there is those kinds of partnerships or arrangements in any jurisdiction, I would say, including in Alberta, frankly, where they've gone to a full privatized model, but they still have a wholesaling obligation on behalf of the taxpayers, and they have rules and regulations for those who are in the business. The rules have to be followed. There's a contract that's entered into. We've had to make tough decisions over the last 10 years with the SLGA terminating contracts of 9 franchisees in rural communities across this province. I'm not going to get into the specific details of this particular case, but I can tell you that since August of 2011, the SLGA has been trying to work with this particular outlet to try to ensure that it's complying with the rules and regulations that everybody knew going in. Everyone signed off on them with limited success. And I think there's been a great deal of patience on the part of regulators, and now they've taken a decision. Now, I understand that there may be a development in the story where the store in particular is recognizing that it's made some mistakes, and we'll see where that takes us. But you can have increased involvement by the private sector. We support that, certainly, but even with that increased involvement, you're still going to have a regulatory function, and you still have contracts, and those contracts need to be honored.
Oh, I'm with you 100%. And, you never take the high moral ground when you've broken the law. So, I don't have any quarrel with that. But I look at Alberta, where you have licensing, regulating, taxation, which are so critical, but you don't have, for example, the government deciding through the special order desk, that's where you stock businesses. Or, the wholesalers, bring the product Alberta to here, 3 days to ship it, 6 weeks for the bureaucrats in SLGA to release it from their huge warehouse to the vendors. I mean, it makes business awfully difficult when you're dealing with myriad levels of government that again, does 7 different things in regulating booze.
Well, I think it's fair to say that whether it's in the distribution, the sale of alcohol, or even some of the laws and rules that you've talked about in your show and that people have been talking about around the province, I think it's reasonable for our government and to be having a look at the state of these regulations of the sales system while being consistent with the campaign commitment that we made. We worked hard to be a government that keeps the promises that we made in an election campaign, to do the things that we said we would do and to not do the things we said we wouldn't do. But having said that, I think there is an opportunity for some review. I've heard the minister even on your show referencing that, and I think you're going to see willingness on the part of the government to try to strike this right balance. It's a little bit of what you're talking about right now.
Premier Brad Wall is with us. Lines are lighting up already, as they always do when the Premier's here. Here is how you get to ask your question to the Premier. 1-877-332-8255. I've pretty well exhausted my list. I have a few other things. The whole health care savings issue. The Premier was speaking nationally on that the other day. But this is where you take center stage. You and the Premier. Only on News Talk Radio. I'm John Gormley. This is our monthly session of Ask the Premier. Premier Brad Wall is with us in Swift Current this morning. Your calls on anything you want to put to your Premier. Let's go to Les in Dundurn. Les, you're on with Premier Wall.
Yes, good morning. I was wondering if the province is ever going to put the shoulders on Highway 5 between Saskatoon and the Bruno Corner. It's only about a 60-kilometer that hasn't been done, and it sure make it safer if we had the shoulders on there.
Les, I don't know about that specific question, whether that's part of some capital planning highways is done, but I'll take that back and report back to the show next month. I might as well talk, if I can, John, a little bit about Highway 22 and just in general some of the highways issues that you've been raising, if that's okay, without taking up the time.
No, absolutely.
Too many callers. A couple of quick points. First of all, in this year's budget, we sort of have allotted an amount, we've allotted an amount that ties the record for the highest increase, the highest investment in highway spending at $581 million. Since we took office in our first 4 years, we've spent 64% more on highways than the previous 4 years before the 2007 election. Having said by the way, we've also developed a 5-year capital plan that's pretty transparent. People can see where their highway is on the list. Having said all of that, there is way more work to be done. There are a lot of bad highways. 22 is one of them. There's some work underway there right now. We're going to get some important work done and some shouldering there, especially in some of those areas where that school bus got stuck. People saw on the news with construction on the road set to begin 213. And John, if there's an admission, I would say that while we have a very good evaluation process where we rely on officials who look at traffic and safety and all these other issues to develop this 5-year plan, I think we should be looking to improve it. If we've made a mistake, I think it's in terms of ensuring that there is also some common sense infused and overlaid in all of these decisions. They're not easy to make, and even this amount of money that we're spending, there's always more potholes than pavement. But 22 should have been, we arguably should have looked at this sooner in a more aggressive way, and part of it's because of the model we're using, which is good, but I think we can always review the evaluation process. I think we are going to do that because highways are crucial, not just in terms of commerce, not just in terms of getting around the province, but obviously in terms of safety. So there's some areas for us to continue to work on, and we're going to do just that.
Now, this evaluative criteria, I mean, there are certain highways, there's the notorious 368, which was very, very bad. I think you put that in the very first capital plan upgrade. So how does something like 22 under this model get lost or get deferred?
I think because there is a very systematic process that we rely on officials to use. We try to depoliticize the process where a lot of outcry and or the political electoral map itself can come to bear on highway construction, for example. And there's always part of that because MLAs are there to raise concerns on the part of their constituents. In this case, Glenn Hart's certainly done that. But I do think it's important to give credit to the process we have, which is to try to depoliticize it, look at 5 years, look at traffic issues, look at safety issues, and let the officials, let the engineers make the recommendation. Having said that, I think we can always review the process. Because, what's also changing in this growing province of ours, John, is traffic patterns are changing. Road highways that really weren't that well-traveled, especially around our major centers, are being well-traveled now as people are trying to get to work from satellite communities or even from communities that would be further away than what we would typically think of as a satellite community. So I think this is what we can do and we will do because we want to make sure that highways are the priority they should be in our budget, but also in our actions in terms of government.
Premier Brad Wall is with us. This is Ask the Premier. Kathy in Prince Albert, you're on with Premier Brad Wall, ma'am.
Hi, Premier Brad Wall. Why is Saskatoon getting more bridges than Prince Albert? Prince Albert really needs a second bridge.
Well, I'm not sure what you're referring to. Certainly about 3 years ago, we approved together with the federal government and the city of Saskatoon, I guess it's about 4 years ago now, the bridge project there for for the long-awaited access points in Saskatoon. Now, in Saskatoon, that was on the south side, and Saskatoon's musing now about a north bridge. Certainly the government hasn't made any commitment to that. With respect to PA, we're at full weights now on the bridge there currently, and the government's agreed to pay for all of the cost to repair that the bridge that's there. We know there's there's the proposal, the desire for a new bridge. It wasn't in the budget this year. It's certainly part of the inventory of very large capital projects that we know exist in the province, including the one in Saskatoon. But I don't think we won't make a decision based on sort of a quota in terms of which communities got bridges. We'll have to make it based on, again, the same things we've talked about in terms of highways, economics, the safety issue, the traffic issue, and we know Prince Albert's growing as well, so we understand this continues to be a desire of that community.
Premier Brad Wall, 1-877-332-8255. Milo in Melfort, your question for the Premier.
Yes, Mr. Premier, you're doing a great job, and that's why I just have a small issue. I'm trying to take my telephone number over to a private company, and apparently SaskTel won't let that number go. I'm just wondering if you could look into that.
Now, is that would be a landline, Milo? Because cell phones, You've been able to do it for years.
Yes, a landline. And I guess only in Saskatchewan we can't take our cell phone or our landline numbers with us.
Milo, I will check into that because John's right. Of course, we've been able to do that on the cell side for some time, and I know now there's these other providers in terms of some of it internet-based for phone and for landline. So I will check into it and report back. And while I'm at it, John, if I can, the last month we took a call from someone who also had a SaskTel-related question about desktop email support.
Yes.
And I can provide you a bit of an answer on that very quickly.
Perfect.
In the past, and you know what, I'm not too proud to tell you that I am reading this, John, because this is on the technical side in terms of SaskTel.
You're going to throw initials around like HTML and that kind of thing? Yeah, okay.
That's right. Well, I'm going to throw around a bunch of stuff like that. So in the past, only a few email programs have existed that allowed service providers like SaskTel to support sort of these limited offerings. But now there's this proliferation, a huge variety of the complex email programs. People are familiar with those, and SaskTel and other providers have simply stopped providing that comprehensive support. SaskTel advises that if a customer is having issues with their desktop email, they should use some type of subscription. Here we go, John. Based like Live Expert is one example they use, or to contact the software manufacturer for support. How is that?
Not bad. I
hope there's no quiz on this.
I was just saying, I still didn't really understand it, but okay. So basically, subscriptions would be the way to go, rather than having this built in as part of your internet service.
Yes.
Okay.
And if Milo is listening, or if he's probably now gone, if he wants to give his number to the producer off air, we can have someone contact him. Okay,
unfortunately we lost Milo, but why don't we do a bring forward on that anyway? Because I think that's an interesting question. I've just never heard it addressed before. So
in the meantime, if Milo is if Milo's listening still, he should call his MLA's office, Kevin Phillip there in Melfort, and we'll track him down and get him so he doesn't have to wait a month for Ask the Premier to get his answer.
Good stuff. Premier Brad Wall is here. Many calls coming up and questions on a variety of issues. I'm John Gormley. This is News Talk Radio. I'm John Gormley. Good to have you here. Boy, kicking off this week, do we have a ton of stuff on the go today. Open lines, which usually runs 9 to 10. We've deferred from the 10 to 11 o'clock hour, and many things there. Also coming up a little bit later, the owner of that Saskatoon wine store, Cava Secreta, here at 11 o'clock, Cam Rizos. Michael Corin's new book. You know, you watch Corin on the Sun News Network. The new book is Heresy, 10 Lies They Spread About Christianity. A lot of stuff coming up here. But right now, our featured guest, Premier Brad Wall, his monthly session of Ask the Premier. This is the April edition, and some great calls. Your questions, your points of view you want to put to your Premier. All right, let's get back into Swift Current, where Premier Wall is now, and to Mary in Saskatoon. Mary, you're on with Premier Brad Wall.
Yes, Premier Wall. I was wondering if you could elaborate on the changes that will be made to the electoral boundaries regarding the age of 18 and those under 18 who won't be counted. It's just 18 and over for the new boundaries.
Sure. Mary, thanks for the call. Well, after every census, we redraw the boundaries here in the province because populations have changed, and they think that after census, it's the best chance check those changes and reconfigure the map. It's happened for many, many years this way. In fact, the NDP in 1979, for that whole period from 79 to 82, used this method of counting for the electoral map. So it's certainly happened here. It's also happening currently. Actually, a more restrictive count's happening in places like Quebec, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Yukon, where they just simply use registered voters. We are not advocating that. We're advocating, though, that we go to eligible voters. In other words, 18 years of age and older. And, of course, everybody counts. When we do services for the people of this province, when that happened from 79 to 82, and it happens in other jurisdictions, governments are there to serve everybody of every age, to serve families, to serve urban families, rural, north and south, to hopefully facilitate a growing economy, and we're going to continue to do that. For the purposes of drawing an electoral map, though, where you're accommodating people who can vote, I think there's some sense in counting people who are eligible to vote. So that's really the change there, and other jurisdictions have done this for some time. We're going to join them in this regard.
Okay, because I've had trouble getting my head around this because, one assumes you take the eligible voting pool and say, let's have them within that deviation plus or minus, right, to make each riding.
Right.
I'm not sure this is saying anybody who isn't an eligible voter, i.e. under 18 or not a Canadian citizen, somehow doesn't count in the calculus.
Well, of course not. I haven't understood that either, and we hear this argument from opposition and a few others that, because they're not part of the math that goes into drawing a map around a constituency, then they don't count. John, I just say, we're happy to present our record in terms of supporting families, in terms of supporting children, in terms of increasing daycare spaces, by the way, with more needed there in the province, in terms of our support for children who have intellectual disabilities, our increased support for education, for post-secondary education. Some of those at the start are not yet of 18 yet either. That was the case in our house. So, that's the measure of whether people count, is a government service providing service to and being accountable to in its service delivery to all ages. And we're certainly prepared to make that defense. But the math as to how you draw a map by counting those who are eligible to vote within that deviation, that margin, I think that makes some sense.
Premier Brad Wall here. Okay, health care savings was the only other issue I brought. We'll get back to the calls in a minute, but I wanted to quiz you a little on health. What you were talking about at this conference recently, the so-called lean management, the perception here, and I think quite rightly, is you have a number of health regions, you have an incredibly management or bureaucracy-heavy kind of system. Is there something to the issue that we spend an awful lot of money and resources in the management side of health?
I think we've been sensitive to that. We started off with a patient-first review and looked at that right balance. We have national groups like CIHI, an acronym familiar to people in healthcare, but they are well respected as groups who measure the efficiency of systems, both from the patient perspective and the management perspective. And they'll say that we actually have one of the lowest ratios of management to frontline workers compared to other places in the country. Having said that, I think we're always asking the question, can we do better? That's why we brought lean management techniques, which was first championed by Toyota, now adopted by not just companies, but organizations all over the world. We brought those lean techniques to the system, and it's bearing results. It's not bearing results for us. It's not all about efficiencies, by the way. Sometimes it's about better care. We've leaned out the cancer agency in Saskatoon, for example. Wait times between a patient's first appointment and a CT scan is down 92%. Saved $10 million just by bringing lean management techniques, some common sense to how we deal with the inventory for blood. In other words, what we do for the discard rate for red blood cells. $10 million saved there. $1.2 million through more effective management of vaccines. We've looked at the absentee issue in all the health regions in terms of sick days and brought some lean management techniques to that. Province-wide, attendance management have saved $18 million to date. So that's what we were talking about a bit in Montebello. We're seeing a combination of efficiencies and some better care with obviously a lot more work to be done. Emergency rooms are too full. We still have people, although surgical wait lists are coming down dramatically, and the list of people waiting is lower now than it has been since we started keeping this number in 2004. There is still more work to be done, and we're always looking to find efficiencies. inefficiencies in the health system, but it is a large system. It's $4+ billion in Saskatoon alone, $1 billion, and so this is a process, not an event. But we're determined to continue with it. Other provinces are looking at what we're doing, and we're also looking at best practices elsewhere to bring innovation to the system, but to do so in a way that kind of leans it out a little bit, that provides greater efficiency, and is always focused on how does this impact care at the end of the day.
Now, the private delivery of certain surgeries, both in Saskatoon and Regina, what's been the status on that?
Well, surgical wait times are down. They are down significantly in the province of Saskatchewan. Part of the reason, not the only reason, but part of the reason is that we are deploying those who can provide private surgeries into the system, into the public system. So now the government can contract with private clinics to provide those surgeries. Nobody can jump the queue, so to speak. Nobody's getting ahead of anyone else because of how much money is in their wallet. But what we're seeing are surgical wait times coming down in a significant way. Since 2007, people waiting 18 months and longer, down 91%, 12 months and longer, down 80%, 6 months, down 56%. And as I said, the wait list is lower now than it has been since 2004 when we started keeping these numbers. So we're going to continue to do it. We think that given the choice between surgery and ideology, the people of the province will choose surgery.
Now, some of our Regina listeners have flagged the SCI, Surgical Centers, Inc. Not enough surgeries being done there and too many delays. Have you had that issue raised?
I haven't had it raised directly with me. I'm sure that's been the case with the health ministry, and I think we'd be very sensitive to checking into that. If that's the kind of feedback, frankly, that's very helpful. We're heading down a new road as we again try to set aside a sort of ideological bias and just try to focus on patient care within a public system. And as we make these are significant changes to the system, we're going to rely on the feedback of people to say, here's a concern, or this is what's working good. And I think that's what a responsive government should be all about, and I think the health system would be sensitive to those inquiries.
Premier Brad Wall with us. Your questions. Fran in White City, you're on with the Premier.
Yes. My question deals with the education portion of property taxes, and I thank your government for making changes that were brought in a few years ago. They were very good. However, in the budget, there is a provision that in 2013, municipal governments they collect the taxes and set the discounts. We will no longer be able to offer a fairly substantial discount on the education portion in our community.
Now, this is for early payment, Fran?
Early payment. Okay. In White City, for the past few years, we've offered a 15% discount on municipal and education. By the 1st of July, 90% of our money is in, and that's a pretty good tool for the administration. Plus, for the taxpayers, that's also pretty substantial too, and that's gone. And I really, think that was a bad thing to do, to take that away. Maybe the mill rates between the urban and the rural should be a little closer together. I think we have 3 for...
Okay, Fran, let's get a question on the early payment. I think a lot of people were wondering about that, Premier.
Sure. Well, it used to be, of course, that the education tax was certainly levied locally by the school board, collected by the municipalities, and so with that local input, there was a discount provided for people who paid early. And in this budget, by the way, I'll just back up a little bit. Fran's right. We made significant changes to the education tax early on in our term. We had promised significant education tax relief. We were able to keep it. One of the tools we used to keep it was a province-wide education tax mill rate. So that's now set provincially, and the government's funding education to a greater extent, property to a lesser extent. And because the government's involved, we could calculate the total amount of money, the millions of dollars that were effectively lost to the Treasury in terms of the discount. So what we've said in this budget, and this is one of those decisions we talked about off the top of the show, municipalities can continue providing an early discount, but as for the provincial mill rate that has to fund the education system, that has to support our teachers, that actually has to support the new schools we're building in the budget, we can't afford the millions of dollars of accumulated discount. As you know, with other bills, you pay them on time, and if you don't, there can be some penalties down the road. We've taken a different approach over the years in property tax. Municipalities can still do the discount, but we've said, look, we need those resources to continue to fully fund and provide the proper education in terms of the classroom, both the capital and the operating.
Premier Brad Wallace here. This is our April session of Ask the Premier. Hang on, callers. From the number of MLAs to fish and gaming laws, family law as well. Bunch of questions coming up. I'm Gormley, and this is News Talk Radio. I'm John Gormley. Premier Brad Wallace here. Let's ask the Premier, 1-877-332-8255. Okay, we lost the caller who had the question, and I thought it was a good one. Of course it was a good one because I agreed with the caller. 3 new MLAs, Premier. You and I have been disagreeing on this. You are changing the electoral boundaries redistribution process. Some of us think with modern technology and all else, we don't need 3 more. Why are you pursuing this?
Well, our population is growing. As I said when this issue was first raised, after a census, the election after a census, we take a look at the electoral map. It's never been a surprise. It's always happened. And when the province's population is growing, and it's growing now in an unprecedented way, you take a look at the number of representatives you have. We have a representation by population system. And there were a number of options. The largest number of MLAs we've ever had in the province was 66. And even though our population is higher than it's ever been, we didn't think we needed to go that high. So we think we've struck a balance at 61, 3 additional MLAs, and we have committed that this is not going to cost the taxpayers any additional money. We will find the monies from existing legislative assembly budget, from existing budgets that exist to serve MLAs. And in terms of our government, we've worked hard to lead by example. We've actually significantly reduced by millions the amount of ministerial travel. We've reduced by millions the amount of government advertising. So we're sensitive to the fact that government needs to sort of lead by example and be more efficient. We can strike this balance between the right representation for rural and urban in the north without costing taxpayers any more money, and that's the proposal that we're advancing.
Premier Brad Wall. Now, Heath in Rosetown. Now, you have a good question, sir, that's been getting a lot of talk in rural communities. Heath?
Yeah, I was wondering what was going to happen with federal community pastures that the province is going to take on.
Right. Okay, so this is the federal government devolving the community pastures. What is the provincial piece in that, Premier?
Well, the provincial piece is that we obviously are not direct part of their community pastures. There's 60 federal community pastures in the province, about just under 2 million acres. And 1.6 is going to revert back to the province. There's going to be, we hear from the Fed, sort of a 5-year plan that starts in 2013. No pastures affected this year. 5 to be divested in 2013, 5 in 2014, and the rest over the next 3 years. We're going to work with the Feds and the pasture patrons. We need to do that, and producers, frankly, on the transition. We will have 52 provincially run pastures, community pastures. Those are provincial ones that will not be affected by this. But we're trying to work with the federal government and the patrons of the federal pastures to see if there can be a smooth transition, so that those who rely on them, and there are a number of producers that do, can have access to those. And again, it's a federal decision. I guess it's difficult to promise. Certainly, we can't promise on their behalf, but we've agreed to be to hopefully play a constructive role in the transition.
All right, time for one more call quickly. Darcy in Saskatoon, another question on education property tax, sir.
Yes, Mr. Premier, education property tax on residential homes is the highest in Saskatchewan in all of Canada. You did make great strides by eliminating 90% of it on agricultural land, but I'm still paying the highest tax, which means I have to have a higher income to be able to afford a home. This needs attention, and it needs attention now, because this is an unfair tax, taxing property for education. I want you to do something about it.
Well, when we did the changes to education tax we've talked about earlier with Fran's call, it applied to everybody, not just agricultural land. We significantly reduced the onus on urban property to fund education as well, because we agree it's not the best way to fund education. I certainly agree with the caller. I'm not sure about his cross-country comparison. I'm going to double-check and bring that back on the next show, because I think we might be doing a little bit better than that. Having said that, we've said all along that we need to continue to reduce the reliance grants on property to fund education. It is a capital tax. Those are the most inefficient taxes in terms of any economy, but it means that we have to find those revenues in general revenue to be able to do that. So it really is a tax cut. And we've also talked about the importance of maintaining a balanced budget. We think that fiscal responsibility is sort of the bedrock. It's the platform of what we're calling the Saskatchewan Advantage, of what people are calling the Saskatchewan Advantage. And so as we look at tax options, and the education tax reduction is one of them, as we look at expenditures in public service, we also have to keep in mind the importance of a balanced budget now, the only one in the country.
Mr. Premier, good having you by. Thank you, and let's do this again next month.
Thanks, John. Take care.
Premier Brad Wall joining us from Swift Current. Ask the Premier.